Hi, everyone. We're going to get started slowly as people keep rolling in. I wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking a little bit about security hardening, specifically the topic of one-time security hardening, which is a topic for some reason, that seems to have a bit of controversy when you talk to MSPs. Like my two co-presenters, we talk to a lot of MSPs, and we often hear this conversation around, I did a hardening project, or I'm about to do a hardening project, and it's what's next, and how often, and when do I revisit, and how do I know that the project worked and was successful. So the goal today is to make it a very interactive session. I would say, ask any questions along the way. We want to make this very interactive. We do this for you, the audience. It's not for ourselves. So obviously, the more you ask and the more you interact with us, the better the conversation is going to be. And then again, feel free to put your chats in your questions in the chats. And if we don't get to them, then we'll make sure to email you. So wanted to take a quick second to introduce myself and introduce my two presenters. My name is Derik Belair. I am CEO and co-founder of Augmentt. Super happy to be here. I'm joined by two very, very intelligent, very experienced people, Jussi and Michael. Jussi, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll do the same for Michael, and then we'll jump in.
Yep, definitely happy to be here. So my name is Jussi. I'm based in Helsinki, Finland, and I'm also glad to announce we don't have any snow left in Finland anymore. So spring is finally coming. I'm spending my time on architectures, hybrid deployments, multi-clouds, and whenever there's an IP address, then you typically know there's some sort of a security angle. And it could be something to do with a business transformation, or it could be something to do with an IT transformation. So typically, I try to understand both aspects when it comes down to security.
That's fantastic. Great overview. Thanks. Michael?
Yeah. So I'm Michael Kraft. I'm a senior sales engineer at Augmentt. I've been working with MSPs for about 15 years now, always on the cybersecurity side of things, whether it was the old days of antivirus and endpoint protection, to DLP, to now hardening Microsoft environments. So, and in my years in the industry, I've learned quite a bit from MSPs, and hopefully I can transfer some of that knowledge onto you guys today. And I'm in North Carolina. There is no snow here either. Actually, we are full swing into spring. A lot of pollen in the air, so if you hear some nasally in my voice, I do apologize for that. So, back to you, Derik.
All right. I like how everybody's rubbing it in that there's still snow where I am, but I'll let that go. Michael, we got to get you to change your picture, so you got to show that glorious beard in those pictures next time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we jump into it? Really, today, what we want to talk about is this sort of myth around the set it and forget it. I think everybody understands that security is an ongoing process, but when it comes to hardening projects, when it comes to building checklists, doing onboarding, we find that a lot of MSPs struggle with the frequency, the cadence. How often do you do it? When do you revisit it? Why do you need to revisit? What happens between the hardening projects? And really, what I think is really interesting to me is what the two of you are seeing out in the marketplace. So maybe what I can do is just start with a question for you, C. What are you seeing today when it comes to security hardening, specifically as a one-time effort? I mean, do you run across that often? In what context does that come up?
I run into that a little bit less nowadays. I'm super happy for that one because for the past couple of years, often the security hardening has been this sort of a one-off exercise. Let's run through a checklist. Let's check all the security controls. We'll arrive at some sort of a result. We can transform that into a percentage out of 100. Then we can claim, okay, we are secure or we're not secure. Sort of like thinking it's a binary end result. But nowadays, what I'm seeing more and more is, especially with Microsoft 365 and to a degree Entra ID as well, I'm seeing more understanding with the fact that it's not a static platform. It's not a static environment. It's not even a single environment. because in Microsoft 365, you have so many different services. They have their own respective controls. And then you sort of haven't tried it tying all of that together. And depending on what you configure where and how, that also dictates how all of those different platforms and environments play together. So in that sense, I'm seeing more understanding at the depth of trying to harden something, but I don't mean to sound that it wouldn't be possible. It just requires a more dynamic approach instead of this set and forget sort of an approach.
Yeah, it's a great point because, certainly we're seeing a lot of things changing on the Microsoft front that needs to be revisited. And it can be a very daunting initiative to harden. It's like, how long's a piece of string? I mean, you could do it forever, you could start somewhere. And maybe that brings up a good question for you, Michael. When MSPs, typically look at doing a hardening project, what do they typically focus on to start? Do you see sort of common first step, second step sort of approach when it comes to this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, typically what I see, at least, well, first thing, Microsoft will start you off with security defaults, and unfortunately gone are the days where security defaults is going to do its job. So one of the first things you want to do is turn off security defaults. But then usually what I see is, maybe rolling out a series of conditional access policies that maybe less of an impact on the client's environment as far as what the users see day to day, but make it heavy impact on security. But whether it be like making sure that users can't log in from outside of trusted locations, or setting up some type of, or preventing legacy authentication, or setting up where only registered devices they can access the company data. But the biggest one that of course users do notice is MFA, and that's like the first thing that I recommend getting started with. One of the first things I see most of our MSPs starting with is just ensuring that at least users have MFA. That's step one. And then you can start to get into some of the other pieces of the hardening project and dig deeper into the Microsoft environment.
And do you find that that's something that, every MSP, whether it's an existing customer or a new customer, they would all benefit from this? Or is it something that it's one project for a new customer, it's something else for existing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that they would all benefit from. But I would definitely say, like, if it's a new customer, you might have, say one project where you do that initial security hardening, and then with existing customers, obviously you want to revisit those initial security setups. But then there's additional layers that you can start to add on after you've done that say initial setup of the environment.
That's really interesting. So maybe we could just say, if an environment starts secure, so the MSP engages with the customer, gets the project up and running, defines what is a step one, what's an actual step two, but assuming that it's nice and secure. I mean, I guess my question is to either of you is what happens over time that things degrade? Like, does it actually get worse over time, or does it just not improve?
I can start. So it definitely gets worse over time, but that also depends a lot on the environment and perhaps how advanced capabilities are being utilized. And it's a sort of a yin and yang in that sense, that on the other hand, I see many environments, many companies, they want to go with the latest and greatest fun stuff and useful stuff. For example, Microsoft 365 Copilot. You definitely want to go in there, get the sort of productivity gains from that one. But while you're doing that, you might not have enough time to focus on how do we fix the existing security challenges and issues? How do we check permissions? How do we check for oversharing? All the usual things you should be doing before enabling something like Copilot capabilities. That's one aspect. And the second aspect is, let's not change anything. Let's not enroll anything new because we're secure now. We want to maintain the security by not enabling anything, even if it would benefit the users. So I sort of see the security drift happening on both ends, going all in with something that is deemed as super useful, definitely, and then at the same time, not going in on something that should be enabled. Perhaps it's a technical capability that would require somebody to spend time in onboarding users for that one. But then that is discarded because we don't want to spend time on this one. And through those two sort of approaches, you see the security drift happening.
Very cool. And Michael,
Yeah.
when you look at an environment like that, what do you find, where do you find the most common gaps are that do degrade over time? Like, what are the areas that you see?
Yeah. So, well, and even going back to what Jussi just mentioned as well, where a lot of times they want to enable all the latest and greatest things, which, I mean, like everyone wants that. But taking that extra time to make sure those latest and greatest things are secure, it might be more work up front, but in the long run, it's going to save you a lot more time and effort. So, like, say, for example, like setting up SharePoint, you want to make sure that like just standard users can't set up sites, that only admins can set up sites. I mean, it's an extra step, yes, but in the grand scheme of things, your SharePoint's going to be a lot more secure. So I see things like that where sometimes, like Jussi was saying, like, things get enabled without being secured. But then also, as far as degradation over time, it's, things might get set up by, say, technician A, and then a few months later, technician B is doing some other things. So they've, what they've done might conflict with what was done previously, or maybe they turn a feature off so that they can set something else on, and then they forget to turn that feature back on, or a new user gets added and they're not added to the right groups or the right roles. So just as the environment, I would say, evolves over time, that security often starts to fall apart because the security is not, it's like, oh, it's already set. We don't need to mess with that. When in fact, it is something that you need to keep that constant eye on and make changes as the environment changes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I gotta wonder, maybe something that Jussi had said before, do you find that the same thing happens with like identity and conditional access? Like, does it apply to that also? Or is it mostly advanced feature, advanced functionality?
Conditional access policies, that's an interesting, definitely an interesting configuration bit, because I've seen a lot of people go all in with the policies, like let's do 75 different policies with all different imaginable scenarios so that everything is locked down. And then probably you don't get the security drift from that because you cannot change anything any longer. You don't really know what will get affected if we disable this or if we tweak that one. But then on the opposite side, again, is that you might only see one policy, enforce MFA, which is great. Michael, you already said MFA has to be in there, but if that's the only policy, then nothing else really matters that much, because once MFA is done, then we don't really account for anything else in terms of access and zero trust and what sort of content people can actually work with.
That's really interesting. One of the things that I wonder, and maybe you guys can give me a little bit of anecdotal perspective here, but when an MSP looks at a security hardening project, in your experience, at what point does that fall into the life cycle or the engagement with the customer? Is it like a one-time project that's offered as a service? Is it during an onboarding, during a quarterly business review? Like, at what point does that happen? You'd like to think that it happens immediately as soon as it starts, and that's the phase one. But is that how you guys are seeing it also?
I definitely see it, like you said, like phase one, like they'll, as they onboard a new tenant or a new customer, you kind of go over the security, like what layout, what they're going to do for them initially. And then what I see is that usually it tends to be more successful is when they do have that long-term plan laid out and they do share that with the customer. And a lot of times that is like maybe during the QBR, like where it's just, this quarter, these things are going to be addressed. Once those have been addressed, then we're going to move on to these next few items. So I think sometimes, you don't want to do everything at once and just completely, overwhelm the customer. But what I've seen is successful is by doing that kind of in stages and then keeping the customer in the loop so they understand not only what's changing, but also why it's changing. That's also important to explain to a client why you need to secure these items.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An approach we use, I would say, every time we start working with a new customer is that we do the initial assessment first. And when I say assessment, I'm not saying audits, because typically when you see audits, it means somebody or a team goes in, they run a gazillion tools, they produce 200 pages of documentation and findings. Nobody wants to read those, even if many of the things in there would be useful. So we do an assessment, which is very raw in the sense, let's have a look at everything. We can have a look at Entra ID, Microsoft 365, anything that connects with those, if that would be the scope. And based on those findings, you can typically sort of get the lay of the land in the sense that okay, you have perhaps E5 licenses. Are you utilizing those security capabilities from those licenses? And the point is not to just enable everything and flip them on, because that's trivial, but you don't really know what's going to happen. But it's more like, this is the starting point. Let's build a roadmap. Typically, that's 6 to 12 months forward. And it doesn't have to be our team to implement those, because many of those aspects are something the customers can implement themselves, or use a tool, or use their preferred vendor, or who else. And the goal would be to secure it well enough. Not lock down everything, because nothing, again, happens after that one, but secure it in a continuous way. And by the time you reach that maybe 12 months milestone, then you can do a new assessment and see, well, let's see what changed. Did we get new licensing? Did we get new products, new tools? Do we now have to do something else? And typically it's then less, because the base is now covered.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm a business guy. I'm going to ask a question I think most business guys ask me. Do you charge for this? Do you charge for the first? Do you charge for every other one? What kind of upsell, cross-sell of licenses or other services come out of that? What's the monetization strategy around this that you've seen, Jussi?
So back in the day, when I still had ample time and no kids at home screaming for food, I wrote a bunch of books. And I figured, let me hand out these books for free, the first one. And it was a nice PDF file. I gave it away for free. People get it. Oh, this is nice. Let me put that in the download folder, never to open it again. The value of that book is essentially zero, because you don't really make an effort to get it. So typically what we try to do, there's definitely going to be some sort of a reasonable price for the assessment. And when I say reasonable, I'm saying, let's spend 2 days in a meeting room and go through everything and produce the results, instead of spending 2 months, because nobody even remembers after 2 months. Why did we get started on this one? Because we produce so much content. And after that 2 days, then the customer typically knows which direction is the most important one to go first. We typically find things that should be fixed immediately. Oh, MFA is not enabled for global admins. That's a typical one. So you should fix this right now. And then you can build this sort of journey from here to the preferred state over the next months.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And Michael, I know I talk to a lot of MSPs, and you talk to all the MSPs. There seems to be a real difference, obviously between an audit and a hardening project. Although I find a lot of times people kind of mix the two together. I find, do you find that a lot of our MSPs or MSP in general do approach audit as a way to engage with a customer and have a meaningful conversation, but potentially as a free offering, but then the hardening project is what flows out of it? Like, how do you see audit versus these projects, playing together?
Yeah. So specifically like in the Microsoft world and what we're doing now, I see a lot of times where they will provide the audit for free, just as this is what's wrong with your environment or where you're lacking on security. And then they'll plan out the project work and then charge accordingly with that. So that's what I see most of the time with Microsoft. But Jussi brought up a good point where if you do an assessment and then maybe spend more time with the client, provide maybe more value than just the basic audit, that can be something that you can charge for. And actually in my former life, when I was in the DLP industry, DLP is very complicated. So for our we would charge to do a security audit on the DLP side. Now, of course, if the client moved forward, we would take that price off. But yeah, I kind of like the idea of maybe charging for the assessments and getting more detailed with them in that, and keeping the customer involved and explain the journey. And then of course you can charge for the hardening as well.
Yeah, it's so funny. You get, like Jussi said, you get given something that is valuable, whether it's an audit or an assessment, but because you didn't pay for it, you tend to just undervalue it. Whereas the exact same engagement with a dollar amount to it, and maybe it's credited towards a project or something, but when there's a dollar amount to it, it's almost like you value the information more, even though it's just as valuable on both sides. So that business model approach, I think, is really, really critical. And there's probably not one right way, one wrong way to do it. It obviously works, in your motion, your sales motion, but very interesting to look at the distinction between the two.
And one aspect on that one is that when you do an assessment or an audit, what I typically find is as one of the most valuable things for the customer is that you bring in people who have this sort of cross-platform skill. They can understand Entra ID and SharePoint and Exchange and Microsoft 365 as a whole, maybe something from DLP. That way, you will have a few people you can talk to during those few days when you do the assessment, and you can get answers to most of your open questions you might have, instead of bringing in 10 people and each one being super focused on just one tiny bit. Because then when you're talking to somebody and you ask, so what about Entra ID? Oh, I don't know anything about that. You have to talk to that guy. Then you go to the next guy and try explaining the context, and he says, no, I'm not that guy. It's the third guy. And you don't really get the value from there. So what we've found is that people need to have a wide enough base in terms of understanding what they're assessing so that they can fully sort of provide the information on the go at the same time as doing the assessment.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, certainly, as we talk about this, and anybody that is in this space understands that, security is not a one-time project. It's an ongoing journey. It's an operation. Certainly what we've seen out of mature MSPs and mature security practices, ongoing monitoring is just as important as the one-time project. Monitoring is the key. Policy tuning is an ongoing process. No two policies are going to apply equally to two separate customers. Everybody has a slightly unique set of requirements, set of security standards that they need to adhere to. Creating and having strong business context into the customer really, really is important, because again, it helps you fine tune what security means for them and what kind of level of tolerance they're willing to accept. I guess the question I have when it comes to that is, Jussi, one of the things that you've mentioned before that I really liked is that unfortunately a lot of MSPs approach security with a bit of an IT mindset. They think of how they used to deliver IT and then they try to apply it to security. And a lot of them are much more about turning things on and off and enabling and disabling things, when they're designing a security practice. I guess my question for you is, in your experience, number one, is that a true statement? And number two is why is that a problem?
I think IT, considering security and IT in general, it's splintered into so many different knowledge domains that for somebody working in business, it's typically super hard to grasp what is this guy talking about. I might go in with a mindset, okay, let's talk about public key infrastructure. Let's definitely fix everything you have on your certificates. And somebody on the business side goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. A certificate to me is a diploma on the wall. It's nothing in this context. So I feel the challenge and how to fix that one is you need to align with business. And somebody wiser than me once said that if you work in cybersecurity, you should typically be invited to all the tables, meaning that it's a table where you talk about sales or products or IT or budget or anything else. Somebody from security should be sitting on those tables to voice out the opinions and the needs, because security needs to be everywhere to a reasonable degree.
Yep. And Michael, again, from your side, when you think about, traditional MSPs, maybe not pure play security MSPs, but just regular MSPs, why is this continuous security, operation, why is it so challenging for an average MSP? Like, what is it that makes it challenging? Is it a mindset from the way they used to do business to where they need to? Is it technical? Is it the expertise, the skill set? Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah. That's a good question. And I think it can, of course it can vary from business to business, but I think a lot of times it might be that mindset where, maybe you already have a good relationship with the client. You don't want to step on their toes. You don't want to say anything that might throw them off or might make them think otherwise, or even consider, looking elsewhere. So I think there's always a lot of times there's that nervousness of they don't want to do anything that might cause the customer to think twice about why they're doing business with the MSP. So I think one of the things that the MSP can do to add value is to be able to show some type of whether it be some type of reporting or something that they can show what they're doing to the client, so that and in a way that the client can understand as well, not too technical. But yeah, I think a lot of times it is, they're just, I don't want to not set in their ways, but it's just one of those where they don't want to maybe do anything that's going to change the relationship that they already have with their client, especially if it's a long-time client that they have a good relationship with.
Yeah, and you see, I think maybe along the same lines, do you find that there is a little bit of, if there isn't domain-specific knowledge in one area, that they'll try to avoid that area and just not deal with it? Because obviously not dealing with anything security is not going to be a great strategy. Do you find that that's ever an issue, just the technical challenges of some of the depth of security parameters that are available?
Yeah, I definitely find that quite often nowadays. And it could be something that is bubbling under and sort of becoming a standard. One example would be landing zones in Azure. You might have a well-driven business, everything operating quite well, security is top-notch, but all the workloads, all the additional stuff that you might be relying on Azure, it's just sort of thrown in there, and nobody ever bothered to do any sort of taxonomy or tagging or security for that aspect. So what I'm seeing often is businesses might say, well, let's not go there. It looks a little bit suspicious for us. We don't have knowledge for that one. And our current partner helping us out on IT stuff, they have no experience on this one either. And then you go, well, but still you should consider it if it makes sense instead of not consider it because it seems vague or cryptic for you.
Yeah.
One capability that I often find bringing huge value to practically any sized business is when you go to Microsoft Defender XDR. So that's the separate portal. In there, you can nowadays find something called exposure management. And initially, when I saw that one, I think it was released about a year and a half ago, and it has since evolved quite a bit. Initially, when I saw exposure management, I figured, well, this is nice. It's sort of gathering the current status of many of these capabilities and functionalities into business-driven goals like email security, cloud security, identity security. And then it unpacks what should be done or what should be considered. And I think Microsoft hasn't really had this before. And it's super helpful when you can have the tricky technical bits lined out in more of a business formal language. And I use that quite often to try to explain, well, this is the thing we have to fix, and this is the KPI for it. It has nothing technical in it. It's a simple KPI that we have to reach, and in order to reach that one, we need to go through these things together right now.
It's a great point. Being able to translate what you're looking at from a security perspective, security feature and functionality into something that's relevant for the customer is critical. I mean, customers don't wake up one day thinking, I should really tackle this conditional access, or I should really tackle, it's just not them, but they do want to address, very specific types of security. They do want to address the end problem. So I find that, the more MSPs can turn security into something that's meaningful for the company that they're talking to, that is unique to their industries, the more you can tailor make it, I think the better the conversation goes and the more genuine it feels like you're working together on this. Well, yeah, I guess that's, go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was going to say, and that is something I've come across quite a few times where some of, an MSP that I'm talking to, they have a brand new client that they're pulling in where the former MSP knew nothing about the business. Maybe they threw on the few security features. The client got tired of that. They're looking for someone else. So I think, like the MSP that actually takes the time to get to know the business, explain how these security features are going to help them with their business, makes a huge difference with clients.
Yeah. I feel it's whenever I talk to my bank, they're trying to give me all of these options and all of this stuff around insurance and everything. Like, just boil it down to something I understand and I care about, and then I'll listen. It's like earn the right to talk to me about this, because if you're just going technical, you've lost me. Well, maybe this is a good sort of segue to the next topic, which is, it certainly seems, in all realms of security, definitely in the realm of Microsoft security, that things are getting complex. They're getting, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of possibilities. If you look at everything from the identity platform, if you're talking about a growing SaaS ecosystem, more things being connected, you're talking about AI, Copilot. regulatory pressure. We hear about that all the time. That's just something else breathing down the customer's neck. It seems to be getting more challenging, and I think which is a great opportunity for customers to lean on their technology partner, their MSPs and their security partners. They need your help now more than ever. Even though things are getting more powerful, they're also getting more complex. So maybe one of the questions, that I can ask Jussi is, as you look ahead, 3, 4, 5 years, what's really going to separate, organizations that is ahead of the game, or at least is keeping up, versus those that lag behind and really struggle to move forward? Do you feel like there's something that you need to do and need to prepare for?
Yeah, this is a great question. Back in '96, I think Microsoft released Windows NT 4. And this was still the time when they would ship the manuals in this thin paper for you. I read them all. I was at the office, I had plenty of time. I read everything. I leaned back on my chair and said, I am the human large language machine now. I know everything about Windows NT 4 now. And we are not going to get back to those times anymore. There's simply too much information that you could internalize that and say, I can do everything in Entra ID, or I can do everything in all Copilot aspects. It's impossible. So how I feel right now for the next 3 to 5 years is that companies who can adopt good, well-behaving, grounded AI systems, be it Copilot, be it a third-party capability, be it a custom large language model that we bolt on into our processes. And when they can understand the business demands, but get these productivity gains from AI. And I'm not talking about summarizing my emails or sending a lengthier email that I'm not typing up myself. That is sort of end user related productivity. I'm talking more about, well, we need to do a scan on our system, or we need to identify how conditional access policies are set. Let's use an agent to scan through those. And whatever results we're getting back, we need somebody senior enough to then give guidance for the agent what needs to be fixed later on. And that will be tricky, because at the same time, you should be offloading a lot of that mental workload to an agent or a team of agents. But at the same time, you should be able to understand everything you're requesting, and you should be understanding everything you're getting back. And I see a huge challenge in that, especially for juniors who might be seniors 5 years from now, and also for seniors who might be more senior 5 years from now, but we cannot sort of drop the ball and just externalize the thinking to an automated system. We still need to be sort of on the driver's seat to get these things sorted out.
Yep, that's a great point. And Michael, from your perspective, when you engage with MSPs today, where do you find the real struggle is? I mean, again, Microsoft security is a ginormous topic, but what do you feel like the biggest areas of struggle is for MSPs that are trying to embrace this and really trying to build this out as a successful practice?
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest struggles I see is trying to figure out how to relay the information to clients, especially like when it comes to spending more money on security. I think that seems to be one of the biggest struggles I see, where they might have clients that spent years on just standard Microsoft licensing, and trying to explain to them why they need to upgrade to premium licensing so they can do additional security policies, things like that. And then and also the fact that and Jussi just brought up the fact that the future is changing quite a bit. So being able to adjust to how Microsoft is adjusting, to being able to adjust to being able to embrace AI, and AI is great, but obviously AI doesn't have the experience that a human has. So also being able to, even when like you said, you still need to be an expert on those subjects, even if you have the AI doing the work for you. So I think that's part of the problem is relating to customers, but I think also part of the problem is just maybe kind of siloing that knowledge, rather than trying to learn everything Microsoft, have different experts on the team that can help out in different areas of Microsoft.
That's a great point. And maybe just talking about, education and resource, obviously it's incredibly challenging to find good quality, people and teammates to be able to bring that expertise in-house. As an MSP today, who can you lean on, or where are good resources to be able to help educate your team and level up your team? It's something maybe from Microsoft, from other vendors. Maybe it's a question to both of you. What have you seen as a good area of resource for these guys?
That's a tricky but a good question. You mentioned the obvious candidates, but what I'm always sort of telling is that if you go to a conference, it could be a smaller local conference, a user group, it could be a larger conference. Go there, attend the sessions, but meet with the speakers, meet with the audience, get connected, start networking in a sort of reasonable way. Once you build those connections, then you can also start building those resources where if you need overflow support, you actually have people you can reach out to because you already met, and you didn't meet because you wanted to sell something. You met because you really wanted to get to know people.
Yeah. Michael, have you seen good areas of resource where you point people to really help themselves sort of get leveled up that way?
Yeah. I mean, well, first off, yeah. I mean, like you mentioned already, Microsoft. There's all kinds of free resources available. You can get certificates online, and that's definitely a great way to level up. Now, me personally, I'm not big on reading a bunch of documents and taking a bunch of quizzes online. That's just my personal preference. I'm not a big fan of that. So for me, what works best is there are actually you could watch. There's a lot of great YouTubers out there. Actually, the Bearded 365 guy, he's just a perfect example where. You can get a lot of just little tidbits of information. So, whether it be, YouTube or even as Jussi suggested, getting to, going to these conferences, getting to know the speakers, if you find a Microsoft expert that you can talk to, that's hugely beneficial because you can actually have that human interaction. But, or even, like I said, you've got those Microsoft certificates that you can get for free.
Yep. It's a great point. And I hear this from MSPs a lot. And it's funny because I feel like technical information is readily available. Like there's more technical information on how to make, how to get things done. I find that a lot of MSPs struggle with where do I start? Not necessarily how do I do this one complex thing? It's where does it fit in the chain? How do I get started? So I think, really being able to understand your customers and what they need to accomplish, and then finding out technically how you get that done is critical. I find also that some of our successful MSPs tend to develop a set of either baselines or levels of security that they feel comfortable with, that they feel is good for their customers, and being able to implement that across the board, I think really helps deliver profitable and scalable services. Doing one-off security things is difficult and it's time consuming and it's challenging for a small team. But being able to do things that you feel good doing across the board. And again, starting with things like, MFA, conditional access, and really understanding what the base is. And I think there's a lot of really good resource for what makes a good, better, or best security environment and what those pieces are. But I would say certainly, as Jussi pointed out, there are so many great conferences, so many great MSPs that you can network with. And I find that the MSP community, which I think is what I love, they're so open and forthcoming with how they do things. Like if you just ask and network and say, how do you approach this? People are always willing to share. I've never heard somebody saying that's my secret sauce, I'm never telling you. So yeah, I would say definitely great point. That whole, collaboration, networking, and there's so many groups and peer groups and online that, it's really, really beneficial. Well, so, as we look to wrapping up, and again, I want to be very conscious of time. I certainly get a couple of takeaways. One is that, coming back to the topic of hardening, it doesn't feel like a finish line. It feels like it's a stage, and there are multiple, maybe infinite amount of stages. So I think, the saying I always use is it's easier to eat an elephant one bite at a time. So you're probably not going to harden everything, but understanding what is a good phase one, getting comfortable with that, making sure that you can replicate that seems like a great way to start. I also get the sense that Microsoft environments are getting much more complex, which again, with complexity comes a lot of opportunity, opportunity for you to service your customers better and make them more secure. And but it is complex, and there are resources, but I think it's all up to all of us to educate ourselves as an ongoing journey. The other one I think is this idea of this continuous operation, that it's continuity, continuousness, like that seems the name of the game. Jussi, from your perspective, any final words for the audience, not just about this, but also how they interact with you, your content, LinkedIn, anything that you want to share with the group that as a final sort of topic?
Yeah, I'm definitely always welcoming people to reach out, and sometimes I'm wondering, I might be presenting at a large conference. I'm done with whatever I was talking about, and then later somebody reaches out to me over LinkedIn. Yeah, I didn't want to bother you with this question, so I have it in here now. I'm like, yeah, but we eat the same bread from the same store, so just go ahead and ask. But one fun anecdote from a couple of years ago, we had plenty of customers telling us at the time that, why isn't this secure by default? Why do we have to do all this work? Why doesn't Microsoft just lock everything down? So I asked one of my colleagues that if he has time, spend as much time as humanly possible to take our lab environment, look it down fully, just that everything is top notch. He came back to me about 2 days later and said, I spent 2 really long nights on this one. I'm like, no, that's not what I asked. Just get to it. And it was fully locked down, no emails going out, no emails coming in, nothing worked, but it was super secure. And that was a good reminder for us that it's continuously evolving. You continuously have to work on it, but the goal is not to go overboard in the sense that you go too deep into each individual bit. You sort of have to push everything 1 inch at a time to keep it together.
It's such a great point. It's funny. I always look at security like this as I look at home security. A highly secured home probably wouldn't have any windows. The doors would only let you in for 1 minute and once a day, but not very usable. And I always say that, home security as an example, it's different based on the neighborhoods you live in. You live out in the country, maybe bars on the windows is not necessarily, but you live downtown, maybe that's a good option. So understanding that security is a balance, and it fits the owner that is working after this, and that security, does have different levels based on who you are, the sector you're in, how big, and so on. Michael, maybe same question to you.
Yeah. I mean, well, and one of the things that when you guys are talking just now, it kind of came to my mind is that what I see a lot of times is that people see security as like they have an end goal in mind where, like, say, like the Microsoft Secure Score, like they're just doing everything they can to get that secure score up. Well, like Jussi said, yeah, you're going to lock down the environment if you do that. I mean, you have to figure out that balance of what is right for the customer and also, what's going to keep them secure. I mean, I typically tell people if you can get to an 80%, that's pretty much about as close to 100 as you're going to get without actually, causing a lot of harm. So, don't look at it as, an end goal. It is something that you're going to continually work on with the client. But also, and Derik, to your point, it really is going to matter. It varies from customer to customer where that finish line actually is. So, it's not a one size fits all.
That's a great point. Well, we're almost out of time. So what I'll suggest is anybody that's got questions after the fact, please feel free to email all of us. Reach out to us on our website or on LinkedIn. We're always, we're a very open bunch. We're very, very willing to talk and to share and really just to collaborate together. Security for one is good for security for all. So it's, we're all in this thing together. I think there's just a world of opportunity right now with Microsoft. Microsoft is giving us all the tools and giving us, all of the resources that we need. But that last mile is up to MSPs to get that secured. So, guys, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to just thank you very, very much for the time. Jussi, Michael, I really, really appreciated it. And we're going to make this deck available on demand. So if you guys want to, feel free to reach out. And that's it. I think we've got maybe 40 seconds to go. So I'll give everybody back their 40 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.